On the night of the 22nd of September, 1979, an American satellite recorded two flashes of light, a fraction of a second apart, over a stretch of empty ocean between southern Africa and Antarctica. That double flash had a very specific meaning. It was the exact fingerprint the satellite had been built, at enormous cost, to catch, the light of a nuclear bomb going off in the open air. I went back through the declassified reports on this one, and the part that still gets me is not the flash. It's that the United States government then spent the better part of a year explaining, very carefully, why the thing its own sensor saw had probably never happened. This is the shape the satellite recorded that night, redrawn from the figures in the declassified analysis. A hard spike, then a dip, then a second, slower rise. Every nuclear explosion in the open air writes almost exactly that signature, and nothing else in nature really does. Two separate sensors on the same satellite both traced it, and within weeks, it had turned into one of the strangest arguments in the history of American intelligence. To understand why a flicker of light caused such a mess, you have to know what was watching. In 1963, the major powers signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which pushed nuclear testing underground and made setting off a bomb in the atmosphere illegal. A treaty like that is only worth the paper it's on if you can catch a cheater. So the United States built a family of satellites called Vela and parked them tens of thousands of miles up, high enough that a couple of them could watch the entire planet at once. Each Vela carried a set of sensors with a joking name bang meters that did exactly one thing. They measured the brightness of the world below, 1,000 times a second, and waited for the particular double pulse of a bomb. By 1979, these satellites had caught 41 atmospheric nuclear tests, and every single one was later confirmed by other means. Not once had the system raised a false alarm with a full double flash on two sensors at the same moment. So when an aging satellite called Vela 6911 sent home an alert tagged 747, the people who read its data had a decade of hard reasons to believe it. Here is what that alert actually looked like. The first flash is astonishingly short. It peaks in well under 1,000th of a second, because you are seeing the raw surface of a brand new fireball before anything can dim it. Then the fireball throws out a shock wave that briefly wraps it in a cooler, darker shell, and the light drops into what the analysts literally called the well, about 5,000ths of a second in. The fireball then swells, turns transparent again, and its blazing interior shines back out, slower and broader, peaking near 50 milliseconds. From the timing of that dip and that second peak, you can even read off the rough size of the weapon. For September 22nd, the numbers came out small, 2, maybe 3 kilotons, detonated close to the surface. Honestly, the location was the harder part. The satellite's eyes could tell that the sky had flashed, but not precisely where, so the position had to come from other sensors, and it pointed at the ocean near a remote scrap of South African territory called the Prince Edward Islands. Cold and permanently storm-covered, about as far from watching eyes as anywhere on Earth. If you wanted to test a bomb where nobody would ever see it, you could hardly choose better, except that something did see it. And for a while, the flash was not alone in the evidence. Navy hydrophones strung across the southern oceans picked up a sharp pulse whose timing, and whose echoes off the Antarctic ice, matched a small blast at the sea surface near that same spot. The Naval Research Laboratory studied it for a 300-page report and concluded it fit a nuclear explosion. A radar station in Puerto Rico logged a strange ripple moving through the upper atmosphere, the kind the researcher on duty said he had never seen before. And months later, low levels of radioactive iodine, a short-lived crumb of fresh fallout, showed up in the thyroids of sheep across southeastern Australia, downwind, on roughly the right schedule. There was one hole in all this, and it turned out to matter enormously. The Air Force sent sampling planes to fly through the radioactive cloud and bring home a physical piece of it, the smoking gun. They searched the wrong patch of sky, and they came back empty. No sample of the fallout was ever captured. That single gap, the one thing nobody could hold in their hand, is where the whole story swings. Because by late 1979, this flash had become a political problem of the worst possible kind. Jimmy Carter had staked his presidency on stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. His own diary from those weeks notes the flash and the suspicion of an Israeli test. He was deep in a bruising arms control fight with the Soviets and a re-election campaign he would end up losing. And when investigators asked who, in that empty ocean, could possibly have set off a small bomb, the plausible answers were two friendly governments, apartheid South Africa and Israel. Confirming a test meant publicly confronting an ally and detonating a piece of delicate diplomacy. It was, to put it mildly, an inconvenient flash. So the White House did the thing governments do with an inconvenient fact. It convened a panel of eminent experts, chaired by an MIT engineer named Jack Ruina and featuring the Nobel physicist Luis Alvarez, and asked them to take a harder look at the data. What they fixed on was, I'll admit, a real detail. Both sensors had seen the flash. Through that first sharp spike, the two traces agreed beautifully. But on the second, slower peak, they disagreed on the brightness by more than the experts thought they should. One reading looked like a bomb up in the air, the other more like a bomb at the surface. Out of that discrepancy, the panel built an escape hatch. Perhaps, they suggested, no bomb had gone off at all. A tiny meteoroid, a speck of space rock, might have struck the elderly satellite and knocked loose a little cloud of glinting debris. That debris, in turn, could have caught the sunlight and flung it back into the sensors, mimicking the pattern. They called these freak glitches zoo events. The panel's carefully worded verdict was that the signal was probably not from a nuclear explosion, while conceding in the very same sentence that they could not rule one out. Alvarez, who relished a contrarian puzzle, once said the main skill of a scientific detective is deciding which evidence to ignore. A great deal got ignored here. When the Research Institute 3 later ran the odds on the flying debris idea, they came back with something like 1 in 100 billion. What the panel slid past is the part I can't get over. Among all those freak debris glitches on record, not one had ever produced that razor-sharp first spike on both sensors at once. Alert 747 had. And almost everybody else who examined the data disagreed with the panel's way out. The Naval Research Laboratory stood by its blast. Defense intelligence judged it a real test. So did the CIA's own analysts, and a separate panel of nuclear weapons scientists pulled together just for this. One Los Alamos man put it flatly, years afterward. The whole federal laboratory community had concluded the data indicated a bomb. The president's panel, the one that shaped the public story, stood almost alone. It had produced the finding that made the problem disappear. If it really was a test, whose was it? The explanation that has best survived 40 years of picking is a joint job. A small Israeli device, tried out with South African logistical help, in South Africa's stormy back garden. The journalist Seymour Hersh reported Israeli sources describing precisely that arrangement. A former South African naval officer later claimed it was an operation he called Phoenix, and said the blast was meant to stay invisible. Bad weather was supposed to cover it. The weather shifted, and the Americans caught the light. To be fair, he is a single and rather compromised witness, and I'd hold his account loosely. There is also a real wrinkle. Inspectors later found that South Africa's own first bomb wasn't finished until weeks after the flash, which nudges the finger away from Pretoria's device and toward its partner. In 1993, South Africa admitted it had built 6 nuclear weapons and then taken them apart, the only nation ever to disarm itself completely. Israel has never confirmed or denied any of it. So where does all of that leave the flash? In 2017, two researchers went back through the original optical traces in a peer-reviewed journal and made the strongest technical case, yet that Alert 747 was exactly what it appeared to be, a nuclear detonation of 2 or 3 kilotons over the South Atlantic. The batches of cables declassified for the event's 40th anniversary lean the same direction. If you ask me, the physical evidence points hard toward a bomb and toward a cover-up of political convenience rather than some grand conspiracy. But I want to be straight with you about what we still do not have. No aircraft ever caught the fallout. Not one government has ever put its name to that light in the sky. And so the event that nearly every scientist who studied it believed was a nuclear test sits in the official record of the United States, quietly filed as something they could not explain.